to Supporting Children Through Transition and Change. In this video, we will look at using mindfulness and yoga to really help regulate our children at specific times of the day. Setting up our rooms, going back to basics and thinking about this as a whole new start. We'll be looking at supporting executive functioning difficulties in children who are feeling stressed and traumatized. We'll be looking at transitions and how to support through various points during the day. We'll be looking at playtime and unstructured time and how to support particularly our hyper and hypo-aroused children during this time. We're going to take a more detailed look at behaviour. We're going to be looking at sanctions and rewards, times in versus times out, restorative justice, positive reinforcement, behaviour plans. We'll also be looking at how important self-care is for you. So coming back after lockdown is coming back to a completely different environment. It's like starting from the beginning again. We're going to take a more detailed look at the different ways we can really support the children and also you as adults, because this is completely different for you as well. So firstly, we're going to look at how mindfulness and yoga can really support our children when they're feeling stressed and traumatized. From the previous videos, we've looked at what happens in the brains and the bodies of our children when their stress responses are turned on. Mindfulness and yoga are proven to not only calm and regulate our minds and bodies, but to begin to heal the damage that has been caused by intense stress and trauma. So mindfulness really regulates the nervous system, so it switches on the rest and digest response, which is the complete opposite from the stress response. So when that is switched on, our bodies cannot be stressed at that moment in time. It lowers our heart rate, our breathing, turns our digestion back on. It helps us to focus. It switches on our thinking brain, and it also releases the feel-good chemicals in our brains. But it also makes our brains create a healing brainwave, a delta brainwave, which actually heals our bodies. So mindfulness is going to be such a powerful tool that you can use for your whole class and the staff to use every day. And the more consistent you are at using it, the more effective it becomes. So I highly cannot recommend enough starting your day with a mindfulness breathing activity as a whole class and a yoga move or a yoga sequence. These two books by DK are fantastic. I use them all the time with children that I work with. If you can teach a mindfulness breathing activity and then blow up the page, have it in your classroom, you can refer to that throughout the day. So when a child does become dysregulated, as part of your helping them to regulate, you can do one of these with them. And the more familiar they become with them, children are going to use these more independently and be able to use them at home as well. So starting your day with mindfulness, doing it just before lunchtime, so that you're actually regulating your children before they're going off into the unstructuredness of playtimes and lunchtimes. Doing it again after lunchtime, so they've had this period where it's been unstructured. And for a lot of children, that's going to be very difficult. So before you come back and try to learn, come back together as a whole class, do a mindfulness breathing exercise, regulate, calm, get their brains into more of a learning component, bringing them right back into their window of tolerance. And I would also suggest doing it at the end of the day, so that the end of the day becomes not only like a safe and calm time, but you're sending them back to their homes in a really good place. The DK yoga book not only teaches isolated yoga moves, but it also teaches sequences. There's an energizing sequence, a calming down sequence. So these are really lovely things to do with your class, to teach them one move at a time and build up to a sequence. Yoga is fantastic for trauma and for stress because you're making the mind-body connection. Often when we are traumatized, our bodies feel a really scary place to be. Our bodies are so pumped with all those stress hormones. We're full of fear. It's so uncomfortable being in our bodies. And a lot of children then shut off from their bodies. They shut down from actually feeling a whole person, from feeling connected. So practicing yoga every day, again in the morning, after lunch, before lunch if you feel you need to, and again at the end of the day, you're reconnecting them to themselves, and you're helping them find these opportunities to feel safe in their body, to have that experience of feeling secure and safe and calm. And the more that you practice this with consistency, you're going to develop that as a skill, something that they can connect to more powerfully and more quickly each time they do it. But you're giving them skills for life so that they know how to deal and manage with these really difficult feelings. Now, for those of you thinking, I don't have time to fit this in, we've got too much learning to do, just remind yourself that children who are stressed and traumatized, they're working from the bottom up model. All their energy, all their focus is on surviving. Their thinking part of the brain is shut down, so they're not able to learn. You'll be going through the motions, but taking 5-10 minutes before starting your learning to really regulate them, to start turning it into a top-down model, you're going to get more learning done afterwards. So we're going to move on now to setting up your room. Your classroom is going to have to be different because of social distancing. You're going to have removed a lot of the soft furnishings and the things that made your classroom really comfortable in order for them to be more easily cleaned. But I'd also like you to think about having a calm space for children to go when they have become completely dysregulated, when their lids have flipped. We know from the previous videos that we need to bring them back into their window of tolerance via connection. So having a calming space in your classroom isn't the same as a timeout area. Not at all. It's a space ideally partly screened, so there's a sense of privacy where a child can feel like eyes aren't on them and they're feeling more safe and contained. Where they can sit, they can do some mindful colouring, they can read a therapeutic story, they can play with some fidget toys. Obviously these will need to be cleaned afterwards. But there's a space for them to go to where they can just focus on calming with an adult. Now this is the key. We're not sending them there on their own. We're sending them there with an adult to regulate. Now it only need be 5 minutes, and then the adult can move away and let them stay there until they're in a state to come back to learn. But being in that regulated zone, having the connection with an adult, having the hormones released that make them feel good, really bringing their stress levels down. And we've spoken in other videos about the use of therapeutic stories. Have some pens and some paper in there so you can do a big empathy drawing with them. But this is going to be a really crucial part of your new COVID classroom. Now, a lot of you might have a visual timetable already in your classroom, but if you haven't, I can't stress enough how important it is to have one for children returning from lockdown. Because everything else is so different, because everything is strange and new and they're coming back full of fear and their stress responses on, it's so important for you to bring a sense of certainty and consistency into this very strange new day. And one of the easiest ways to do this is to have a very strict routine that you follow, and that is a visual routine that's right at the front of the class near the board, so actually the children can constantly see it and you yourself can refer to it. Include in these times the new, more difficult things. So in the past we might just have the lessons that we have, but it's really important that you include from the very beginning meeting the children at the gate, having the temperature taken, washing hands, yoga, mindfulness, and also include on there when the time is that they will eat. For some of our children over lockdown, food will have been a scarcity. Not knowing when they're going to eat and becoming fixated by food is really going to tap into their survival. So for some children, just knowing that at 10 o'clock they're going to have their snack and then at 12 o'clock they're going to have their lunch, having that in a visual will really help them. Don't just assume that it's known and that in itself is enough. In a way, returning from lockdown is like coming all the way back to September with a whole new cohort of children. Everything is different, everything has changed, and so the security and the safety of knowing what the boundaries are is going to be one of the key components in making children feel safe coming back to school. Your children will know the rules from before, but just do it again. Sit down as a class, co-write them, thinking about the fact that they are going to have to keep 2 meters apart and any new rules that come in about hand washing, but really hone it in on the rules that keep them feeling safe and secure. And have this on a really big piece of paper. Have it at the very front of the classroom where you can constantly refer to it and the children can see, because as we know, boundaries help children feel safe and contained. We've spoken in previous videos about the children that are going to be hyper or hypo-reactive. So do your homework, speak to the Senko. Which children do we know have got additional challenges? And just be really aware when the children come back of different behaviours, who is going to need that extra bit of support from you. Make sure the children that are hyperactive and the children that are withdrawn are going to be seated near the front of the class so that you can engage with them non-verbally as well as frequent checking in, so that they have that sense of security of being near you. And also just be aware of the children that are hyper-reactive, where you actually physically seat them. Make sure they can see the door so they know that they are not trapped in the room, and consider keeping them on the outside of a table rather than being next to the wall or next to the window, because that's going to further make them feel like they're trapped. We've spoken in the past about the hyper-reactive children who are running on survival, they're scanning the room, and the slightest movement is going to take their whole attention, something that wouldn't register with somebody that isn't feeling in that way, who is working from a top-down approach. So if you do have displays that are dangling down and that are moving on a mobile, for instance, please take them down, because that is going to constantly draw their attention and keep triggering them into high alert. Children who are very stressed out, whose lids are flipped and who are experiencing trauma will all have executive functioning difficulties. We know from previous videos that our children who are stressed out, whose lids have flipped, are not able to think clearly. Their executive functioning has been shut down. Our executive functioning enables us to focus, to make choices, to reason, to interpret, to reflect, to start a task, to know what to do in order to carry out a task, time management, processing, a whole range of skills that we need in order to execute things properly. You will know yourself what it feels like when you're really, really stressed and you just can't think clearly. Your brain is foggy. You put the kettle in the cupboard. Everything just gets jumbled because you're just not paying attention. If you try to multitask, it just all goes horribly wrong. This is what's happening for these children coming into the classroom. Even though they're there and they're trying to really pay attention to what it is you're asking them to do, it's very, very likely that these children are not going to be able to do this without some support for their executive functioning. Now, a lot of the children have these difficulties all the time, and they maybe be seen as lazy, or they're choosing not to do the work because they know what to do. We've told them 3 times, but they're choosing not to do it. So this is something we need to take a step back from and just make sure, okay, we know that all of their executive functioning is going to be much weaker at the moment. So what can we do to support it? So So there's a few basic things here, some of which you might already do just as a matter of course in your teaching. We're going to chunk instructions. So giving instructions one at a time and making sure that the children have understood what that is. When we give a 2, 3, 4 step instruction, such as go to your tables, get out your science book, write the day, underline it and start question 1. That's a lot of information to process, and when our executive functioning is limited, we're not going to be able to remember all those steps. So chunking our instructions is going to be something really simple but effective. We're going to check in with the children regularly as a whole class, but also individually, so that we really can work out, do they know what it is that they've been asked to do? When we ask a child, do you know what to do? The majority of them are going to say yes, because they don't want to seem silly or to get in trouble. So they're going to say yes, but they don't. So make sure you're asking the question, can you tell me what you need to do first? Also provide now, next, and then cards. And these are so simple to make. You can do it on a laminated piece of paper with it as a grid. And then just for each table, very quick, very short, simple instruction of what to do now. So how to start the task, what to do next, and what to do then. That can be something that can be shared by a whole table. It can be given to an individual child, or you can have it on the board so that everybody can access that support. You might also find that some children could do with a visual instruction next to it, because their ability to make sense of those words and to hold those words in their head may be limited, and the visual is going to get to them a lot easier. Also find that you need to go back to using concrete resources with children that had moved on to more abstract thinking and learning. But if we offer these to the whole class, anyone that needs them to make use of them are going to be able to without fear of looking different. And do make the most of learning partners, of talking and discussion within their groups and with little pairs, so that they can support each other throughout the task. Transitions and changing from one activity to another, or one part of the day to another, traditionally gives a lot of challenge for children that are feeling insecure or feeling quite chaotic. Now, most of our children coming back are going to be feeling these things because everything is so different. So making sure that our transitions are really clear, and that we've given children a lot of warning about the changes that are going to come and when they're going to come. So the visual timetable is going to play a really big role in this. And if you have it at the front of your class, you can make sure that children are aware that in 15 minutes, I'm going to count you down and we'll be moving then to doing X, Y, Z. Giving your children a 15-minute warning, a 10-minute warning, a 5-minute warning, and a 1-minute warning is going to really help that boundary be a lot tighter. And do consider for some children to use a sand timer as another visual means so that they can keep checking in between. This is going to help so many children who are feeling anxious and insecure. With our transitions, I'm sure lots of you do this anyway, and because of the social distancing, it's almost placed upon us, but making sure things happen in small little groups rather than one big thing altogether. So when all the class go out to go and get their coats or their lunch bags, it can create this sudden flurry of movement and chaos and be very triggering. Sending children in little groups, making sure that there's an adult present in the times when it's going to be very chaotic, is just going to really help make those transitions smoother as well. Playtime and unstructured times within the day cause so much difficulty for children that are feeling stressed. When they're running on survival and they're running from the bottom up approach, everything unknown or busy is going to be hugely triggering for them. They haven't got that security of somebody else taking charge and knowing what's going to happen. So this is why doing mindfulness and yoga before playtime and before lunchtime is going to get them in that calmer, more regulated state of mind before entering the chaos. But given the lockdown and the rules around supporting play in the playground so that children are following games like What's the Time, Mr. Wolf, and things like that, does help us a lot. It's going to really help these children because that structure is going to make playtimes feel a lot safer. However, there are still children that are going to struggle with this as well. And it's very likely you know which children they're going to be because they're the ones that struggle normally before lockdown anyway. So really consider giving them a big dose of adult time at the very start when everybody has gone out to play. And this can happen in the playground, or they can come and do a special job with you or read a book. Giving them that dose is like filling their cup up with you and all the good things that happen in a relationship, and you're filling their brain even more with the feel-good chemicals. It's going to really, really help them manage the stress. It's like just before you send them out, you've pulled them so far back into their window of tolerance. They've got a lot more give to kind of manage the difficulties of playtime. And if you find that even with this, it's still really difficult for them, then find them a job to do at playtime. That doesn't necessarily mean they're not in the playground. Give them a job where they're moving, so they could help sweep the playground. They could help clean some equipment. So these jobs mean that they're moving their bodies around, but they're not getting caught in anything that's unstructured. And on their visual timetable, break playtime and lunchtime into its different components. So lunchtime will involve eating lunch in the classroom and then at certain points going out to the playground. Put this into the visual timetable as well, so that everything is just completely known. They know what to expect and when to expect it. Managing children who are attachment seekers. Additionally, these children have been thought of as attention seekers because they're the children that always want a piece of you. They're the ones that need you to answer their questions before anyone else. They've always got something to tell you. They need to come and tell you something that's happened to somebody else. This can be really challenging to deal with. And when you look at it as attention seeking, it's much harder to find the empathy for that child. So if you consider that this child is just seeking attachment, they're seeking an adult who can make them feel safe, can help you bring that sense of empathy and understanding. Now, when you're in a class and you have somebody that is constantly wanting to answer all the questions, you can have an agreement with them that you will call on them once, and then every other time they're going to write their questions down, and you can pop to their table and have a glance at it and keep moving forward. So they're having the opportunity to communicate with you, but it's not in a disruptive way. Equally, when they've always got something to tell you, you can say to them, you can tell me one thing and then write the rest down, and I will look at them with you at the end of class. Again, this becomes something that isn't distracting to you. They're getting to express themselves, and you will likely find that as that goes on, they will feel the security for that, and then the need becomes less. You can also discuss with them finding an alternative way to get your attention rather than keep shouting out all the time. So some teachers might encourage a child to put a ruler on the desk in front of them, or a little toy, or a little flag, something that signals to you that they would like your attention, but they're not actually interrupting you to do so. And you can give them a thumbs up when you see that sign and say to them, I'll give you a thumbs up to show you that I've seen it, but I will come and talk to you about it when I can. And then praise them for all the times that they're able to do that and to wait and to listen. And it will become a regular thing. Make sure that they are seated close to the front of the class so that you can give them huge amounts of non-verbal feedback constantly to give them that supply of knowing that you see them, you hear them, and you're thinking about them. Remember, a lot of these children who need that attachment seeking are the children that are invisible at home, and it's the fear of being invisible and not being seen and not being heard. So if you can give them smiles and thumbs up and a little wink, you're going to be feeding them exactly what they need, but without bringing the distraction to everybody else. You can also make sure you use their name frequently. So when you're doing your positive reinforcement about how well people are working, or just to comment on that person, they can hear you talking about them. They know that you are thinking about them, and that in itself is going to feel settling and calming. Negotiating with them, coming up with these little ideas and making it your personal set of rules together. You're allowing the child to get what it is they need from you. You are responding to the child in a very different way to seeing them as attention seeking. There's nothing more awful than feeling guilty about finding it hard to be around a child because of the level of disruption that they're bringing to everybody else and to you. So when you can approach it differently and you can find this empathetic connection and these really positive strategies, not only are they feeling better and more connected and having healthy relationships, you too are having a much healthier relationship with them. We're going to move on to behaviour now. And from the other videos, I hope now you have a really good understanding of what it is that is going on for a child in their minds and their bodies when they're stressed, and that they are running just on their emotional brain and their survival brain when they have flipped the lid. And that we need to remember this, that a lot of our children are not choosing to misbehave, but they are in such an unregulated survival state that they aren't able to choose to behave in a different way. And viewing them as this makes such a difference. Just going to run over some little top tips here for behaviour. So firstly, don't assume that a child actually knows what it means when we say calm down, settle down, you need to behave. We need to break it down into really concrete, really discrete steps. What does that mean? So for instance, if you go over to a table and ask them to settle down, break that down, actually say what it is you would like to see. So I'm coming over here, guys, because there is a lot of noise and a lot of movement from your table over here. Really need to see everyone sitting very calmly. So 4 legs on the chair, please, sitting still, and you need to have your quiet working voices. That's being completely explicit about what settle down means. When we just assume a child understands this language, we're not giving them the choice to change their behaviour because they're not necessarily sure what it is we want to see. For children that have experienced real complex traumas, it can be really useful to kind of think of the child within the context of their experience. So for example, a child who is a refugee, they have experienced so many traumas that going to school and being in the playground and attending to work might be very tricky for them. And it can be really difficult sometimes to understand why there is so much fighting in the playground when it comes to this child, or why there is so much arguing with teachers when it comes to this child. It can be so helpful to think of a child within the context of their experience, because it helps us connect on a more empathetic level and have that real understanding that they're not choosing to behave like this. They are surviving, and it can help us really connect with them and understand them a lot better. Sanctions and rewards. Now, I'm sure most classes have got their own sanction and reward policy and chart. And I'd just like to bring a caution in here. For the children who have experienced complex trauma, and children coming back from the lockdown who have experienced and are experiencing the trauma of lockdown and COVID and everything we've discussed in previous videos, a public display of behaviour, So your behaviour charts, your sticker charts, all of these things, they don't work with children who are traumatised. And the reason they don't work is because it is coming down to their behaviour choices, for the most part, are being driven by their emotional brain and their survival brain. They're not a cognitive process. So the lack of cause and effect is going to mean that these are the children that are always on the thundercloud. They're always on the red face. Often these children can be there before registration in the morning has even been over. These are the children that consistently miss their golden time every week. They consistently miss playtime and lunchtime. For them, this system doesn't work because they're not consciously making these behaviours happen. Therefore, they cannot consciously choose to stop it. It also deepens a sense of toxic shame and toxic guilt that we've spoken about in previous videos. This then just reinforces that child's notion that they are bad, that they are unlovable, that they can't do anything right. And then that becomes such a huge part of their self-image that they're then compelled to act in ways that make that image make sense. Equally, for children that are withdrawn, the amount of anxiety it can produce to stay on the sunshine, to stay on the green face, to not do anything wrong, can be huge. So while on the face of it, having these displays as a warning, I've moved you to the yellow face, I've moved you to the rain cloud, can push a child so far out of their window of tolerance that the reason for the system being in there in the first place just stops working. Now, boundaries and rules are incredibly important for all children, but particularly traumatized children, because they feel so unsafe. They need there to be the really consistent and firm boundaries. And when they're broken, of course, a child does need to understand what that impact was and to have a consequence. But when we focus purely on it being a behavioural matter, that a child has chosen to misbehave and therefore needs a punitive punishment or consequence, we're not helping that child to change their brain and therefore to be able to make the cognitive choices. So it's about changing our approach and helping a child to really regulate first, to become more cognitively aware of their challenges and be able to do something about it in a restorative way. So this moves us on to restorative justice. Restorative justice is all about a child taking responsibility for their behaviour, but doing something positive about it to restore it, to fix it, rather than being punished for it in a way that's not connected. So for instance, if there was a big incident in the playground with two children, one of whom got really hurt, rather than putting the child that did the hurting in timeout or send them out of the classroom in isolation, we're going to have our time regulating them, to bring them back into their window of tolerance, to do big empathy drawing with them, and then do big empathy with them to understand how their behaviour has impacted the other person. Remember, trauma kills off the parts of the brain responsible for empathy. And we're going to support the child to think about how they can make it better. What can they do to make it right? Now, this isn't just saying sorry, because we all know that doesn't mean anything, but maybe they could write a letter or a card. If they've broken something, then they can help to fix it. If it was an incident in the playground, then they can have their consequence that is in the playground, such as litter picking or gardening, or something that is helping them to make the school community a better place. But it's very much linking into the incident and their behaviour in the first place. And it's important to have this done with an adult, because remember that connection and the relationship and all the healing components of it. Yes, it takes more effort on adult parts, but it has such a better outcome. And it means that the child is actually beginning to understand their behaviour more and to understand the impacts of their behaviour, more so than sending a child off in isolation. Let's face it, a child is not going to think about their behaviour in timeout. All it's going to do is make them feel like the world's against them, they hate everybody and they hate themselves. And as we know, that's not going to get them out of their emotional brain and into their thinking brain. This is all about time in rather than time out. So within that time in, you're connecting, you're exploring emotions, you're bringing words and feelings to your emotions, turning on the thinking brain and actually exploring what it is that it drove you to that behaviour, what it was you did and the impact of that. And then problem solving with the child. What could they do differently next time? But in a much more meaningful way than if they're sat on their own just filling in a timeout sheet. Because remember, the emotional contact with that adult is bringing them security, safety, and all those feel-good hormones. And the more positive experiences we give them, the more they will start to calm and the less likely they are to display any of these behaviours in the first place because they're not running on their emotional and survival brain. We also know that taking away a child's playtime is really counterproductive. It might feel like it's justified because it's something the child enjoys, and therefore if we remove something they enjoy, then it's going to give a powerful message. Well, as we've just explained, the lack of cause and effect doesn't make this happen, and playtime is one of the key parts of the day where they can try and get rid of some of this adrenaline that is just pumping through their bodies. So having that physical release, having the adrenaline release, is going to really impact their whole body and their behaviour positively. We also know that when we use these traditional methods of discipline in schools, we can cause such a big disconnect between ourselves and the child in question that actually relationships can break down. And when that happens, it doesn't serve us as teachers and it really doesn't serve the child. When we change our approach and we do things slightly differently and we do it in a connected way, we're making such a difference to that child, but also to us as teachers, working in a way where our relationships stay not only intact, but they continue to strengthen and develop. I think we're all familiar with positive reinforcement. Just a few words to say here. With your positive reinforcement, just make sure you are using descriptive praise. So rather than saying, oh, good work, or good boy, or well done, great behaviour, break that down into much smaller components. So again, they really understand what it is that they did right that time so that they can repeat it at another time. So you might say, I really like the way you listened to my instructions and then you went down to work and you looked at your now, next and then card and you started your work all by yourself today. So you're really giving that narrative of exactly what it was. Also, when it comes to praise, a lot of people love to get praised and they love to hear people singing really loudly about what they've done. But for some children, direct praise is just too much for them to handle. So for some children with toxic shame and a really difficult internal view of themselves, when somebody really loudly and really openly praises them, those things don't connect and it's too much for them. And it can make a child feel really uncomfortable, but it can also actually trigger them into challenging behaviours because that's what makes sense with their internal view, not the praise. So really reflect on what children you have in your class and how they react to praise. The ones that love it go all out, really descriptive, make sure everybody knows, but take the child that finds it differently to one side, give them a quiet praise, or do more non-verbal praise, or find a way and agree maybe together, how would you like me to show you when you've done something really well? It might be they just prefer a little note. Find a way that makes it comfortable for that child. And the same thing for those children, when there is a certificate celebration in assembly and you'd really like to give them one, you know that it will be too difficult for them to handle, you can arrange for them to have a separate treat whilst the certificate celebration happens. So the rest of the school get to hear about how wonderful this child is. But the child in question can maybe go and have a cup of tea with the head teacher, or go and do something lovely with another member of staff, so that they don't have to try to deal with the difficulty of the praise. Remember, if you've got your new rules displayed very clearly and at the front of the classroom, refer to these all the time. So when you see the children doing something that is fantastic, point to the chart and which one does that respond to. Always trying to help those children connect that those words on the wall actually mean something. And if they can keep coming back to them and they make real sense and they're broken down, it will help give them that model for behaviour, rather than just assuming they know what being respectful means. Breaking it down so clearly so that they can really start to be respectful. And do keep rewards and sanctions completely separate. So if a child has earned something because of their good behaviour, please don't take it away for something they've done that has been wrong. Keep them separate. When we take away those earned rewards, particularly those shared whole class rewards, we're causing such a disconnect. We're shutting down, we're creating such stress, and we're going back and undoing all the good work we've done. So please keep them separate. And if a child in your class is really distressed and finding things really difficult, it might be time to bring in a behaviour plan. Now, I'm not talking about when we section off the day into morning and afternoon, and if a child is good in the morning they get a sticker, and if they're not they don't get one. There is a real need for us to try to identify what it is they're finding difficult, what part of the day it is that is triggering them, what these triggers are, and then what support do they need to manage them. A really great way to manage behaviour such as this is using an ABC behaviour chart. A stands for antecedent. That means what was happening prior to, before the behaviour itself happened. B is a description of the behaviour itself. And C is the consequence. But by that we're looking at the impact of the behaviour. So if you can keep a chart like this running for a week or two concerning the child that is finding things really difficult, you should begin to build up a pattern of when they're getting triggered, what these triggers are, what the behaviour then is, and then the impact. When you have this information, you can sit down and work out what support is needed to be put in to the parts of the day or certain things to stop the behaviour from happening. Then we can have on the behaviour plan 2 or 3 really smart goals. So specific, measurable, achievable, realistic and timed. Make them really short-term goals. And they're going to be strategies that we're teaching them to manage these difficult parts. Then every time they use one of these strategies, they get a praise, they get reward for that. So break the day down into as many parts as necessary. It might just be lessons and playtimes, but you might need to break the lessons down even further into carpet time, table time, whatever you need to do for that specific child. And then within those parts, if they've used the strategy instead of reacting, then they're earning their rewards, they're getting their behaviour goals met. So it's changing our approach again on behaviour. We're not leaving it up to the child to behave, to give them the responsibility to just change their behaviour. We're working out the weaknesses and giving them the support they need to develop those weaknesses so that they can manage. This all comes back to what we've discussed in all the previous videos. We're looking at a child through a trauma-focused lens rather than a behavioural lens. We're thinking what has happened to you, not what is wrong with you. We're looking at their weaknesses and seeing what support we can put in place to really help them develop. And we're connecting all the time to make sure that we are being that really secure and healing relationship that they need to change their physiology and their psychology. So literally changing their brains, making new connections, new positive experiences, to allowing them to meet their potential and not being limited by the trauma and the stress that they've experienced. Lastly, but very importantly, looking at self-care. Now, self-care is normally the very bottom on everybody's lists, particularly if you have families at home. But it's so important that you begin to see yourself as deserving of a bit of self-care. And not only because you work so hard, you have such an important and completely underestimated job, but you need to look after yourself so that you have the patience, you have the emotional energy to be able to do all this stuff that we've spoken about in the videos. When we don't and we become burnt out, we have nothing left to give. And then the only methods that are easy to do are the old ones, and we know that we're not serving those children in any way, and we're not actually helping ourselves. We're not making our jobs any easier or more enjoyable. When we can use these different approaches and we can make sure that we're getting enough self-care, we become so much more satisfied and fulfilled, and we enjoy our jobs so much better. It might be that you're already pretty good at self-care, just do more of it. Or it might be that this is a completely new thing for you. So check out all the different types of self-care there are. It's not just about having a relaxing bath and a scented candle. You know, you can read a book, you can cook yourself something nice, you can go on a bike ride. Anything that fills your cup, anything that makes you feel a bit more nurtured and a bit more like you've given yourself some really valuable time. I really hope that you have found this series of videos really helpful and informative. If you have any questions about anything, do feel free to ping me an email. I'll be more than happy to help. You have such an important role to play in so many children's lives. Never underestimate the power of what it is you do day in, day out in the classroom.